for tuning in and being here. My name is Pianpian, founder and CEO of Amotions AI. Amotions AI provides an emotional intelligence real-time AI sales teammate that can listen in calls live and provide suggestions to salespeople or other customer-facing roles on how the customers are feeling, what are the good questions to ask, to understand customer needs, how to answer customers' questions, how to handle different questions and objections from customers. Our goal is to help salespeople increase conversion rate, reduce sales cycle, and reduce their ramp-up time. And we know that there are a lot of wonderful coaches that Richard is one of them, and he's also had his own famous podcast, and he has written his books, and we're very pleased to have Richard here. Richard, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'll keep it brief because I hate talking about myself as much as I do like talking. But Richard Harris, owner of the Harris Consulting Group, author of The Seller's Journey that's available on Amazon. My goal in business is just to teach reps how to earn the right to ask questions, which questions to ask, and when to ask them. So it connects very nicely with what you're trying to do in terms of that emotional intelligence. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, it's what you're doing. It ties really tightly with what we're doing at Amotions AI, because one of our key aspects of focus of our product is to help people figure out how to connect well with other people, and a big part of that is to ask good questions, to understand needs, because it's actually hard to ask good questions and to be able to really listen. So I'd be curious, Richard, from your experience, like what are the biggest kind of pitfalls you have seen as salespeople or other customer-facing roles are engaging with their prospects, and what are the consequences that come out of that?
Yeah, I think the first part is people are often they know there are certain questions they should be asking, but they might be afraid to ask them because they've never asked them before, or maybe their leadership doesn't actually help them and teach them that. The leadership might say, well, go find out who the decision maker is. But leadership may not teach them, well, how do I ask that? How do I even earn the right to ask that question? And is that even the right question to ask? So I think there's this little bit of fear of the unknown, which as humans, right, we all have. If we've never done something, the first couple of times we do it, it's going to be uncomfortable. So I think there's a general lack of understanding the human condition behind that. That's the first thing. And I think that's a big leadership issue. Leaders should be teaching these things, right? And I think, unfortunately, or whatever it is, the leadership team was never taught themselves. So they're just repeating what they were taught to go figure it out. And as a Gen Xer, I can figure it out because that's how I grew up. But as we bring in these next generations, right, of the millennials and the Gen Zs, that they prefer a little bit more coaching, right? What millennials and Gen Z would call coaching, I would have called micromanaging, right? It would just annoy me to no end. And I think there's this gap in sort of understanding that from the leadership level to the rep level. More leaders have gotten better. More Gen X leaders have gotten better. But ultimately, I think that's been where the big gap is. So I think that's the first thing. And when that happens, that's where people start to ghost us, right? That's because we haven't asked the question, because we're afraid to get the answer of no. We'd rather pretend like we didn't hear that because we didn't ask it. Therefore, we can throw up our shoulders and go, I don't know, when in fact, we should know, and we should at least ask the question. That doesn't mean someone's not going to ghost you, right? I can ask all the right questions. I do ask most of the right questions. Sometimes I miss, but there are definitely times people still ghost me. But at the end of the day, at least I can go to bed at night knowing, well, at least I asked, at least I positioned myself. So if they ghost me, it's not because I didn't do something, it's because of something else they are doing on their side.
That's great. Now, because of the gap of kind of people are not always getting coached on how to do good discoveries. what are your thoughts on how to, like, first, how do you define a good discovery? And
Right.
then second, how do you actually get to have good discoveries?
Two very different questions. So how do you define good discovery? Is by the attempt to confirm a next step, right? If I've done a good enough discovery, I will then ask for the next step. And here's what it means. I will turn around and go, hey, Pianpian, just out of curiosity, uh, you know, how about we put something on the calendar next week, for Tuesday at 4, because it's a whole lot easier to reschedule something than to schedule something. And Pian might say, yes, let's do that. She might say, no, I need a bit more time. Great. Then my next question is to say, Pian, great. Just so I know, if I don't hear from you by next Tuesday or Wednesday, is it okay if I email you or call you? I don't want to bug you, but I don't want to let something slip through the cracks. So now I've attempted to make this connection, right? To confirm that I can stay in touch with them. If Pian turns around and says, well, no, Richard, we'll contact you, don't contact us, which is a fair thing for them to say, then that is probably an indication I didn't do a good enough job of discovery, or I did a good enough job of discovery to a degree, but this really isn't going to be that great of an opportunity. So I'm probably not going to put a lot of stock into it. And I'm going to be mindful about how often I, you know, coach them or coach back to them or get back to them and reconnect. So that's a way to determine if it's good discovery or not. But before I answer the next question, I just want to pause and see if you have a question, or if anybody from the crowd has a question. I'm happy to jump in and ask them, answer something for them.
So we have sales leaders in the audience. I would be curious, Corey, what do you think your kind of in your mind, what do you think are gaps in your efforts, or any kind of questions you might want to ask to figure out what kind of gaps you have in your own efforts in doing good discovery?
Yeah, I'm like a huge stickler for discovery, and it's one of those things where, like, I joined this organization about a year ago when I moved back to Vermont, and I'm working as an IC for the first time in like over a decade.
Ooh,
And yeah, it's interesting. Not as many businesses out here. You'd be surprised. A small place.
I
Um,
understand.
yeah, but one of the things that I think I found coming into a new sales org, like I was in San Francisco doing kind of building sales organizations for like over a decade, and it was one of the first things I did was bring one of my old discovery decks and augment it and kind of change the narrative on like actually getting discovery as the kind of opening part of your conversation or
Mm-hmm.
the meat of your conversation. And
Mm-hmm.
coming here, I'm selling hardware, and we don't do a lot of. I mean, we do discovery, but it's usually like, what do you need this hardware for? Like,
Right.
what are the problems you're facing? And
Right.
one of the challenges that I think is when people are successful and they're ingrained in their kind of like path and they've been doing the same thing, let's just say for 10 years or something, they've been successfully selling whatever it is for, a decade. Getting people to pull back and like change their process or
Mm-hmm.
get a new path of learning or
Mm-hmm.
augment the way in which they ask questions, just getting them to open or ask open-ended questions or getting them to think about getting more out of a conversation than just yes or no, I think is just
Mm-hmm.
like a challenge for me. And I always think it's interesting. I think one of the questions I have is like, how do we get to the point where teaching an old dog new tricks and getting, more ingrained salespeople, more tenured salespeople to think about using discovery as a new tool? I always think that's like a
Yeah.
challenge that I face.
So I think so there's a couple of answers to that, because you've got to be mindful of the people who are there, right? And in some instances they could be grumpy Gus's, right? They're not hitting goal and they're unwilling to change, right? Because they think they know better. You then have people who've been there for a very long time and they're hitting goals, so there's no need for them to change in their mind, right? So it kind of depends on, again, this is how you manage the team, but then coach the individual. So I think that's a part of this equation for you, right? Um, I would sit down and try to have a conversation with them, probably separately, depending on the individual and their where they're at, and ask them what is their hesitation to change, right? It's like, I'm not forcing you to change and do it my way entirely. I'm just trying to help us all make some more money. What's the challenge with that? Is that not something you want? And it's a fair answer if they're like, no. They could be coasting. They could be at that stage of their career, and maybe they've become order takers, right? Particularly as I think about hardware. I don't know if it's computer hardware or like, desks and chairs hardware. Like, I don't know what that is, but you kind of have to understand your business and your business model in relation to that, and have some questions. And then you may have to bring in new people to do it the way you want. And you may, as much as I hate to say it, you may have to, hug somebody out the door because they're not willing to make the change. And if they're not hitting the numbers, well, like, there's only so much you can do. Right. So but I think the first thing is to acknowledge their resistance and to say, hey, I noticed this. I can't tell if it makes you uncomfortable or you don't like it or a little bit of both. And just tell me about that. Help me understand you. Because as humans, we all want to be seen, heard, and understood. So first, it's to come in with that human level as a leadership type of approach and try to understand their point of view and give them the space and grace to position their point of view. And even in that conversation, you don't have to try and change them. You could be like, you know what? That's great. I thank you for sharing that with me. I want to think about all that a little bit and, keep working with you on stuff. Thank you. And maybe that's all you need to do in the first conversation from a coaching perspective.
That's great.
Yeah, it's really good.
Point.
Yeah.
That's doing discoveries among the people who
Yeah.
might
Yeah.
have
I mean,
their own
look,
way. Yeah.
it's the same skill, right? As a leader, we have to use discovery to help motivate other people, or to get them out of their own way, or to encourage them to make changes if they're uncomfortable, and to lead by example. Right? If you lead by example by doing discovery questions when you're coaching a rep, you're kind of teaching them how to do discovery. They may or may not connect those dots immediately, but that's what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. With a goal to make them connect the dots, hopefully self-discovery on their end,
Hopefully. So
Yeah. Now, I think it's always easier to kind of do it as an example to show like what a good discovery means. And are there kind of specific examples, Richard, you might want to share what does good discovery mean? And I mean, we're actually doing the same with our real-time AI sales coach and teammates, like kind of we train the AI with what good looks like first, and then guide people in the call with that.
Yeah. No, I think the thing for people is to understand that our job isn't to convince people to do anything. Our job is to ask them questions so that they convince themselves, and do it in a non-manipulative way. And we're not here to manipulate anybody, right? But we are here to ask them questions about their pain. And before you can even do discovery, you have to kind of earn the right to do that. You have to, at the beginning of a conversation, I call it a respect contract, but, I confirm time with someone. Do you still have 30 minutes for today? Great. In 25 minutes, I'm going to call a timeout and we'll just see where we're at, because I always want to make sure I've got 5 minutes to wrap things up. Then I'm going to say, look, I think we're on the same, fact-finding mission, Pianpian. I think I've got questions for you. You've got questions for me, and let's see where it goes. And everybody's going to say yes to that. And then I'm even going to say, look, Pianpian, if I'm not a good fit, please tell me. You won't offend me. And I'll say, Pianpian, if I can't help you, I'm going to tell you. I don't need to waste your time. Is that fair? Of course, everybody's going to say it's fair. And I'm saying, great, because the last thing I want to do is chase you down with reaching out, checking in, and touching base emails that I'm sure you love getting on a regular basis. I use a little humor there, right? So now I've created this social contract that socially we've agreed how we're going to behave. And then from that respect contract, I transition. I have a very specific open-ended question that's, Pianpian, just out of curiosity, what's happening over there that made you even want to take this call today? And I didn't say, why did you want to talk? Because now all of a sudden I'm pinning it on Pianpian. I'm saying what's happening at the organization, which means executives could be saying something, Pianpian could be thinking something, maybe Pianpian's team is sharing that they're frustrated about something. I want to know what's happening in their real world use case scenario to start my discovery, so that then I can just keep asking more about it. So the respect contract earns the right to ask questions. You have this transition statement that starts the discovery at a high enough non-personal level, but then allows me to just be able to dig deeper and deeper and deeper, depending on what the answer to that, what made you want to take this call today question answer is.
Right. Yeah. That's a great way to start. Kind of as you're gradually unfolding the onion to figure out what it would be. Now, how much discovery do you think someone needs to do if there's like a 30 minutes call?
Right.
Yeah. I know sometimes like one call the whole call could be a discovery, and then like you have like
Yeah.
7 to 8 calls.
So
Yeah.
This is a really good question. So first of all, discovery is not one call, even though the CRM kind of makes it look that way. Even though our leaderships think that it is, it's not always one call. In fact, it's rarely one call. Okay. So that's the first thing, is adjust the mindset. The other thing is to remember that, let's talk about a first meeting. The goal of a first meeting is not to secure a second meeting. The goal of a first meeting, Corey, I'm going to pick on you for a second. The goal of a first meeting is to have Corey want to have another meeting. Not that he accepts it. I need to do enough discovery that Corey turns around and says, that was worth my time. Yes, I would like to have another meeting, when I ask him if he wants another meeting. So that's the goal of the first discovery call, in my opinion. You're not trying to do everything all at once. There's nothing better, in my opinion, than getting to the end of a 30-minute call and it's been such a good conversation that you actually have to have another conversation because you couldn't get through everything. That's a really good indication of a good initial discovery call. So I think that's the first thing to think about, right? We also know that 99 times out of 100, you can have a first call, and unless it's a one call close, like you're calling from Yelp or something like that, we already know that Corey's going to take this back to his team. Nobody's going to buy a 10 or 15 or $20,000 solution in one phone call if there's no relationship that's there, right? We already know Corey's going to go take this back to his team and get their opinions on it. So we should adjust our expectations just as much that, our goal is, let's just get Corey to a place where he wants to have another conversation. That's a great thing.
Now, to just kind of say, for example, I just use my own, but anyone in the audience, please feel free to jump in to provide some case studies. So say like I met some revenue operations leaders at the conference, and they said, well, we're looking for tools to help my sales team grow because our conversion rate is not as great as we want it to be. So yeah, curious to learn more about your solution. Now, what kind of discovery would you do from here?
Well, I think the important thing is to understand, well, okay, what is that rate right now? What do you expect that rate to be? How did you determine that that should be the right rate? Right? Do you have a baseline yet, or are you brand new? Right? I talk to people all the time that if they don't have a baseline of data, then the first 30, 60, 90 days, they're just trying to establish baselines, right? You can't go in and say, oh, here's what we did in 2 weeks. Let's see if we can improve it. Sure, we can, but that's not a real strong data point for a baseline. So that's part of the challenge. Now, in a high growth startup environment, you don't necessarily have 60 days. I get it. I just want you to understand the realization of, the assumptions you're making in your business. So you have to understand, well, what is the current state? What is the desired state? How realistic is their desired state? And what have they been doing that's failed, so that you don't try to come in and teach them something that they've already tried and failed. So you just spend time marinating in their quagmire of stuff, right? You've just got to swim around in it and get them to tell you their specific use case, their specific pain points in that moment before you can even attempt to position what you do. Because if you don't understand them, then they're just going to look at you like a commodity. They're going to think you're already just like so and so. And so they're not going to have any trust in you.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds like a great approach to understand kind of how they have been approaching solving the problem, what works, what didn't work. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add a part there. One of the things that I do on all my like discovery training decks is it always leads into like tailoring your approach. And one
Yeah.
of the things that's so important is a lot of people will jump right into pitching people, and sometimes they'll pitch right into a wall where they are pitching down a rabbit hole of
Yes.
they're going to talk about how, you know, their product solves this problem. And then it turns out that that's not the problem that the person you're talking to has at all. And so you've essentially like laid one of your cards on the table that you shouldn't have. And what happens is if you do discovery appropriately and you find like their pain points, you identify, oh, you know, we used to try doing things this way. Let's say they're just like a software company and they used to try to sell all their stuff to this industry, but now they're realizing this other industry is a much better fit. If you talk to them about that, you ask the right questions and you discover that they're going into this new industry that they're unfamiliar with, then you can pitch that your product solves things for that new industry rather than pitching the old industry. Like it's
Yeah.
really important. Discovery is amazing, but if you don't use it to tailor your conversation with them, you're not actually taking advantage of your discovery.
Yep.
And so it's just a really important part to utilize discovery to actually uncover things that are meaningful to how you can position your solution.
Agreed. 100%.
Yeah.
I cannot disagree at all with what you said, Corey.
Yeah. It's really important.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your examples, Corey. Appreciate it. Now there are also some sales leaders think like it's important for us to, if you're a salesperson, it's also important for us to start by introducing our own solution and kind of show like, okay, what kind of value we could possibly bring before we start asking questions. Otherwise, it would kind of more seem like people would be like, okay, I need to know what you are and who you are and what you do first before I can answer all your questions. So how do you balance that? And it's go ahead.
So in the context of you asking that question, is that like you met someone at a trade show, or is that someone is an inbound lead? Like, give me a little bit more context, because there's a little bit of nuance to that answer.
Okay, so depending on how the
How you
context
met.
yeah. I mean, there are different contexts, right? So, say like it's called salespeople might met someone at the industry
Mhm.
conference, for example.
Right.
Or sometimes they might could be inbound, could be like direct outreach, but someone
Yeah.
took the meeting.
So
Yeah.
so there's a couple of things, right? So if it's at the highest level, you know, I would always try and say, hey, I'm more than happy to tell you about what I do, but if I do, I'm going to go, I might turn around and sound like a salesperson, and I don't even know if that can even help you. So can I ask you just one or two questions? And then of course, yes, I'll answer any questions you have about me. So I would try to take control back of that conversation. Right. And I would try to apply some level of humanity to it. You know, on inbound, it's a little bit easier because they're coming inbound. So it's like, okay, well, what made you? That's why I have that transition statement at the respect contract. That's why that respect contract is so critical at the beginning, because it's establishing the parameters of this conversation, and it's acknowledging that their time is valuable. It's also acknowledging that my time is valuable. And I've already told them that, hey, I got some questions for you, and I'm sure you have questions for me. So they've already agreed that I can ask them questions, right? And then because I have that transition statement of, so what's going on over there that makes you want to talk today, right? It has a more natural ability to flow into that world where they ask me questions or where I ask them questions first. So that's one way to do it. Ironically, I got an inbound yesterday, literally, and the guys said, hey, I'm interested in learning more about your business. And I'm like, okay, this sounds like a pitch, right? But I also have a high sensitivity because this is the world I'm in, right? Like I swim in this world. So, and I tried to respond. I responded to him, and at first I was like, Well, maybe I should say, hey, are you trying to pitch me? Because if so, I don't need your services. I did my research on this company and it's a lead gen company and all that stuff, right? And I'm like, yeah. And then I backed off. I didn't send that email and I just decided to stick with my standard process. Hey, I'm just going to go through my process. Here's what we're going to talk about, and I'll go through what made you want to talk, today. And if he turns around, and my suspicion is he will, he'll say, well, before I answer your questions, you tell me about you. I will just put pause on that. Not, again, I will just say, yeah, are you trying to pitch me? Because if you are, we need to have a different conversation real quick. Because if that's what you're trying to do, it's a different conversation. And I'm sure this person will, if they go down that path, they'll be like, well, I'm trying to find a way to have a mutually beneficial partnership with you. I want to partner with you, which again, in my world and what I do is, you're not trying to partner with me. You're trying to sell me, but you're just trying to come in as this consultative approach. And it's a really lame approach. So it'll be interesting to see how this conversation goes. To your point, though, the critical piece for me was to stick to my process. As soon as I give up control of the process and start answering their questions, and start telling them about me, it's game over, right? Now they're in complete control, and control needs to be mutual, right? The respect contract establishes that mutual control. That's the piece that really matters to me. So.
Yeah. I have run into some of these scenarios, like met someone at the industry conference, and then I just introduce what we do, and then just immediately start asking, like, hey, are you competitive with this product?
Right.
How or how are you different, and how your customer who you
Yeah.
work with, and what kind of use cases you work with? And it's like,
Right. They and which is fair. Like, look, they're
yeah.
doing their job, right? That doesn't mean these are bad people or bad humans or anything. Like, they're allowed to do that. This goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of people not being taught how to handle this situation.
Uh-huh.
Nobody ever taught me well how to establish and maintain control, right? And it doesn't mean they can't ask, but the other part of it is I have to be willing to walk. I got to be willing to say, look, you know what? I appreciate that's how you want to do things. That's not how I do stuff. And, it doesn't sound like you're really interested in my services as a potential customer, and that's okay. And if you're trying to pitch me, that's okay. But that's not what I want to spend my time on today. And so I'll wish you the best, but you've got to be willing to do that.
Now, I mean, there's also like sales leaders, besides they want to increase conversion rate, they also want to reduce sales cycle time. How do you balance kind of doing enough discovery, but also not like having too many calls that just keep doing discovery
Yeah,
and not
they don't.
getting
Yeah.
to
Well,
the
I think you have to have
closure?
in
Yeah.
your process, right? You have to have very specific exit criteria. Very specific. An exit criteria is, what is the most important information that I need to know in order to move this deal forward to the next step, right? So if I'm establishing, need, how much need do I need to understand about their challenges? And what is the economic impact of that need? If I don't have dollarization or numberization to the pain they have around the problems they're having, then I haven't done a good enough job in discovery. Once I have that, I can start to move forward, right? If I need to know a certain level of the people affected by the decision, not necessarily the people who make the decision, that could be my exit criteria. So I have to have very strong exit criteria, which then encourages the right discovery around the right topics and conversations. So that is what's really important, right? Is to understand what your exit criteria is based on what a good deal looks like. That's the most important information. And that'll change from, Pianpian, you're at a startup. That's very different now than Corey, where he's at an established company, right? He probably has more insight into what those exit criteria are at this point, right? That's just the maturity of the business. So, at an early stage, Yes, we want conversions. Yes, we need revenue. Yes, we need logos and all those things. But right now, you just need customers and logos at a super early stage. You need people paying you to tell you that, you don't even have product market fit, but that, you have product market relevance, right? Getting, if you've got 10 deals and you're like, okay, how can we increase our conversion rates? You're paying attention to the wrong thing. 10 deals isn't enough to tell you how to increase your conversion rates. Probably 9.5 of those deals are all super unique, special, different pricing, different things. Some are friends and family. Like, they're not real customers in the traditional go-to-market sense. They're your validation customers. They're not your true customers. And there's a difference between those two. And you should have validation customers early on. That's what you want, right? You need those people so you can keep learning about the process and learning about the tool and making the improvements and all those things. But early on, if you're just trying to optimize for conversions too soon, you're completely misunderstanding how to play the game.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, that's very helpful insight. I have also talked to a good amount of sales leaders that they have multiple steps, and then they have SDR, then they have account executive, like multiple steps
Right.
there. Now, in the beginning, when it starts with just a SDR doing cold call, do you think discovery is still important, and what kind of discovery could be done in like a 2 or 5 minute call before someone hangs up on them?
Right. So, well, again, that comes down to specific exit criteria, right? What are you trying to establish, right? Is your goal in that cold call to get them to want to have a longer call in that moment, or is your goal to set a meeting for later? If your goal is to set a meeting for later, then what is the minimum viable information you need to attempt to set that meeting? And I think that's the key piece, right? You have to, again, know what your exit criteria is for that part of the sales cycle, sales process, and function, to then determine when to set that meeting or how to set that meeting. And if you don't know that, if you don't know what your minimum criteria is, then you're going to have a problem with cold calling. I once had a rep. So we sold enterprise, like legit enterprise, Starbucks and Netflix and, Expedia, like big companies we all know. And he once told me, this is 10 or 12 years ago, so the SDR function was starting to get really hot. And he said, Richard, I don't want to talk to anybody unless I have full BANT, budget, authority, need, and time frame. And I looked at this rep. It was a senior rep, very good rep. And I said, well, if he can get BANT or she can get BANT, what do I need you for? Take the order? Like, that's not an SDR's job, right? That is not an SDR's job. In my opinion, an SDR's job is to determine some level of need, right? That there is some level of need and they're open to talking about it. And to some extent, what level of access to authority does this person even have? Right? Do they even, I don't care if they're the authority figure or not in a cold call. If I've got an enterprise solution, a long sales cycle, I'm not having my SDR call one person at that company. I'm having them call 10. So I'm going to figure it out. And if it takes my rep 7 calls to figure out who the real person is, well, good on that rep for having those 7 calls, right? Don't blame the SDR. That's not their problem. Now, again, over time, as that SDR gets more skilled, yes, you could start to change those parameters for those SDRs, but not the brand new SDR, right? And so you have to understand when you're doing cold calling, I think the highest level is, are you trying to fill the funnel or are you trying to fill the calendar? Because those are 2 different things, right? So right now, Pianpian, you're an early stage startup. Your company's early stage. Right now, you should be trying to fill the calendar, not fill the funnel. You need to have as many conversations with as many people who will have conversations with you about what you do, to continue to measure the market indicators about what you do and the solution you potentially offer and what you might need to pivot to in terms of specific changes. You should be filling the calendar, not just filling the funnel. That's how I see it.
What's the difference between filling the calendar and filling the funnel?
Filling the funnel means you're looking for a very specific qualified deal that can close by the end of the month or the end of the quarter. Filling the calendar means you're having as many conversations as you can so you can figure out how to actually fill the funnel. You're still early stage. You should be talking to anybody and everybody at that point. I also say, again, Corey, I don't know if you have SDRs. Do you have SDRs on your team?
I have what's called a tech sales team, but absolutely
Okay.
they're SDRs. Yeah.
Okay.
Mostly inbound.
So okay. So he's got mostly inbound. If Corey were to pivot and have some of those people start doing outbound, and Corey, you and I, we've never had this conversation before, so bear with me and call me out if I'm wrong. If Corey's going to pivot and have his inbound team start making outbound calls for the first 30 to 45 days of that rep doing outbound calls, or if you were hiring your first outbound SDR, I would build their compensation plan around filling the calendar. I want to get them comfortable asking questions and just asking for the meeting. Even if they turn into crap meetings, I need to build that muscle with this person because it's very different to ask for a meeting when it's outbound versus inbound. Very, very different skill set. So that's the difference of filling the calendar versus filling the funnel. Over time, you stop filling the calendar and you start to fill the funnel. But how are you going to learn how to fill the funnel if you don't even know how to fill the calendar? That's my opinion.
Yeah. So it's like the more if once you have found some kind of established or product market fit, you have a more strict disqualifying criteria. And some of the discovery questions is to figure out whether this person qualifies or not as a lead.
Yep.
Versus like earlier stage startups would be doing more discovery just to understand what could be the disqualifying criteria.
Yeah. I mean, I even have companies that are making their traditional salespeople become full cycle, and those people have to do outbound. Well, guess what? I want that AE, even if they're a senior AE, I want them filling the calendar first. They're not used to asking for it. They're already resistant to doing cold calling in the first place. Otherwise, they'd have been doing it all along. So I'm going to try and make it easy on them. And I'm going to reward them for filling the calendar with something for a certain period of time so that I can at least get them motivated to a degree and feel less pressure in relation to making those outbound calls.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, I recently heard that there's a revenue leader of a company. He said they close 40% of their customer in the first call. If they don't get to close them in the first call, usually the second call they'll close them. And I mean, it's their target customers are restaurants, so a little bit different from like enterprise sales. So
completely.
Yeah.
So that will take a different motion and a different training around the specific skill set to move faster. It's also going to take a different type of rep to do that. Someone who likes that fast attention, right? Who likes that quick turnaround sales cycle, right? They like transactional sales, right? That enterprise sales drives them nuts to sit around and wait for 6 or 12 months for the deal to close. They need that immediate, rush from closing a deal.
Yeah. What have you seen as best practices, kind of correlation between kind of average contract size and like the amount of discovery that someone should do?
Meaning, how much should it take?
How long does it take, or how many meetings does it take to do discovery, like for say like a $200,000 deal versus like some of the smaller deals?
So my belief, and this shifts a lot, my belief is, a 60 to 90-day sales cycle should work for $50,000 or less. The difference will be the number of decision makers involved and probably some level of security that has to be applied, right? once you hit, yeah, once you start to hit over 50,000, I would expect that to be a 9 to 12 month sales cycle. And once you hit 100,000, it's not unusual for that to become a 12 to 18 month sales cycle. I've seen that shift. I've seen $100,000 deals move into that 6 to 9 month sales cycle in the last few years, barring macroeconomic conditions, right? Barring that kind of stuff. So it's not unusual for that to happen faster than a year, but $200,000 deal, 12 to 18 months, in my opinion, unless there's an immediate need. Like if you're selling, security, right? Infrastructure security, and there's a challenge or a concern that happened, then that could move a little bit faster. But that's sort of where I've seen it.
Now with say like there's a 6 to 9 months kind of sales cycle, and within that, like how much discovery do you need to do?
As much as it takes. I mean, it depends, right? So you're going to have more than one discovery call in the beginning. You're going to have multiple discovery calls in the beginning. First one's probably the generic, is this worth us continuing a conversation? The next ones should start to bring in other people, right? And understanding what their needs and challenges are around what you're trying to sell. And then the third level might be the security implementation stuff. And I would say those are phases of calls. That doesn't mean there's only 3 calls, right? There could be 2 or 3 basic discovery calls. There could be 2 or 3 adding people to the, get their opinions calls. And then there could be the infrastructure call. And then there's the legal calls, right? And the negotiation and those calls. So, it's not, we have to stop thinking about discovery as a single call, right? Like that's, and I think that leaders need to stop thinking that after you get off the call, stop asking the question of, well, when's the PO going to get here? When are we getting the contract signed? Like that's just silliness, like that's not a good leader in my opinion.
Yep. Now, you have shared before that you would kind of do role play with people and then figure out how to help them learn how to do the good discovery. That's one way to do that. What are other ways for people to learn how to do good discovery?
Well, I think there are multiple ways. Like everybody learns differently, right? Some people learn by seeing it, some by touching it, some by hearing it or saying it, right? So role play is one piece. Another is reading and studying, right? Depends on how did you like to learn in college or in high school, right? And then there's the part that there's the self-discovery and the self-coaching, where if a rep really wants to get good and get better, well, then they need to take some ownership of that, right? Stop waiting around for leadership to invest in you. If they're not investing in you, why aren't you investing in you? That's the whole thing, right? Like, don't blame leadership for not getting you training and coaching. It's 2025. There's no reason you can't go find yourself something and learn and try something on your own.
I have a really good tactic for doing this. I remember,
please.
One of the last roles I had was at a bank, and I had a team of lenders that was essentially, it was mostly inbound, but it was a pretty complex lending cycle. And one of the things that I would do is I would do retrospectives on deals lost, and we would do retrospectives and ask the question of the reps, what would you have asked to avoid this problem? So let's just say we get to the end of like a lending, like faux pas, and the customer ended up upset because they thought they were going to get a loan. And our loan committee like had some serious problems with them, could have uncovered it if we had asked more questions during the call. And so we would always do these retrospectives where, what do you think you could have asked to prevent this in the future? And that was my best way of getting them to stick to new discovery questions. I had one rep in particular who just would rush through things, get all the information, submit the loans, and be like, if it sticks, just throw it at the wall. If it sticks, it sticks. But it ended up having more customer issues than they had anticipated. Like more people were upset because they thought they'd be getting a loan. And so we used that as a catalyst for them to self-discover how they could ask better questions ahead of time. We talked about this earlier, actually, Pianpian. You brought up the idea of like, how do you know when you've done enough discovery, or like, how do you not waste time on discovery? My answer is that the more discovery you do earlier, the quicker the rest of the process goes. Like I remember I used to have one of those charts that's like effort early means time late. And so if you're putting in a lot of effort early on a deal and do enough discovery to really uncover the things you need, it should be smooth sailing the rest of the way. But if you don't do enough discovery, if you spend, just kind of straight to pitch, run through everything, just get the numbers and go, it can create a lot of hurdles later that you weren't really uncovering. And so it's really important to get that work done early because it makes the rest of the call a lot easier, or the rest of the process a lot easier.
That's really good. I just took a note about what you said. I like that one. So
Yeah.
I will
I like
give
the
you full
chart.
attribution. Yeah, I'll give you full attribution on what could you have asked differently to avoid that.
Yeah. No, I
Um,
love that learning lesson. It works really well.
yeah, that's a good one. And to your point, it's the self-reflective. You're teaching them how to you're teaching them how to coach themselves, which I
Yeah.
like. So you're trying to give them that piece without having to sound like a dictator telling them what to do.
Right. I
Right.
could tell them that's the problem, but they probably wouldn't
Right.
listen. So,
Right. As there's a woman I really love and respect, Cynthia Barnes, and she always says, don't let people should on you. You know
mm,
what you should do? You know what you should
yeah.
do? You're like, and I just live by that these days. And so that's a really good thing around leadership, around you're trying not to should on them,
Yep.
right? You're
I
really
love
trying
I
to
love that term.
exactly, right? Like it's a great one. So go use that one from Cynthia. So that's really good.
Now, what do you think of the idea of taking whatever reflections and learnings that you have got on, like, okay, these are questions you should have asked. Now put it in our AI and then show it in the as they're doing the next call. It's like, hey, these are some of the questions you think could be helpful to ask. Like, here's one of the suggested
I love
questions.
it. Like I think this
Yeah.
is look, I grew up, look, I've been selling since the 1900s, right? The late 1900s, but still, I, we did that by writing something down on a post-it and handing it to the rep. So that's no different. It's better because it's faster and immediate. Versus by the time I finish writing something down, like the conversation might have shifted. Where there are two things that need to happen. One is reps need to practice that with role play calls where the machine prompts them with additional questions so they can get used to this because they're now having to pay attention in different spaces, right? The human brain the human brain really can only well process one thing at a time. There is no such thing as, multitasking.
Mhm.
Can't do both well. You can do both mediocre, but that doesn't go over so well. And your client can tell when you're distracted. So you've got to be mindful of that. So we have to train the body and the mind through some practice with it. I'm all
Right.
for it. Um, and I know that it's coming and I know that you have it. I think some reps will do very well with it and others will not, right? It's just going to be and those who don't do well will either be unwilling to try or unwilling to practice through role playing. And those that do well will probably be younger people who are more used to being bombarded with all this stuff, right? They're used to seeing this stuff. I don't agree with it. I don't like the tactic of like people being so distracted, but if it can work, then I'm all for trying it.
That's great. Yeah. And now what are some excellent discovery questions that you have kind of seen in your career or
Yeah.
scenarios? Yeah.
So um, one of them is when they ask me a question, mine is to say, hey, before I answer that question, what are you really trying to solve? Hey, when you ask me that question, is there a picture in your head? Because I just want to make sure I answer it correctly. Because so often people ask us questions and what the picture in their head gets lost in the, 3 inches between their brain and their mouth. And that's just human condition. I do the same thing. It's not negative. So that's one thing. The other one is, and this is a very specific one to authority, right? Particularly early in discovery. And you can do it over and over again, but particularly early, I don't care who the decision maker is, right? I talked to it earlier that I know Corey's going to go back to the team. So at the end of my first call, my question is to say, hey, Corey, I'm pretty sure when we get off the call, you're going to go talk to some people on your team. Just out of curiosity, who's the most skeptical person on your team when it comes to this, and what are they typically skeptical about? Because that's what I need to know. It doesn't matter who owns the purse strings or who controls the budget or who's the final decision maker. It's a committee. I already know that. I need to know who the skeptics are and what they're skeptical about. Otherwise, it's just going to be terrible, right? Now, all of a sudden, if I say, hey, Corey, who's the most skeptical? What are they skeptical about? Corey's going to pause for a second and he's going to tell me it's Sarah or Bob, and they're often skeptical about this. Great. So, Corey, based on that, what can I give you now so you don't become a ping pong ball going back and forth? Because we already know what that's like. And Corey's going to know exactly what that is, and he's going to probably share one or two things. In many instances, the skeptic is the decision maker. In many instances, they are not. And that's okay. The question is, the real issue is, did I at least ask the question?
Now, do you suggest to say, hey, I would like to talk to the person who's most skeptical in this case, or no?
It'll come up naturally, right? So if Corey tells me who the skeptic is, I'll be like, great. So Corey, I'm going to send this over to you. How about we do this, Corey? What if we put a time on the calendar for next week? Because it's a whole lot easier to reschedule something than to schedule something. And Corey will say yes or no. And I'll be like, great. Corey, if there's somebody else you want to invite, feel free. He'll bring them along if it's time. And if Corey says, no, I need to, it's going to take me some time. Someone's out of vacation. Someone's there. Okay, great. I'll email, how about I email you in 2 weeks and we'll see where things are. Right. If I try to push, particularly in a first meeting, to talk to that next person, I think that offends Corey. I think that, unintentionally offends him, meaning I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm just trying to do my job. But now I'm trying to be dismissive to Corey. And that's not fair. Corey's my champion. If I want Corey to support me, I need to cool my jets and slow down a little bit. So if it's not a one call close, you could, and by the way, you could ask to speak to that person. I just don't know how often that ever really works.
So you continue to talk to the champion first. Yeah.
Yes, but I position it in such a way that it makes sense for the next person to come along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I might say, hey, great. Okay, so Bob and Mary are the two most skeptical people. How about we put something on the calendar for next week for you and I, and we'll go from there. And because it's easier to reschedule than schedule something. And he'll say, sure. I'll be like, great. Do you think we should invite Bob or Mary, or should we hold off on that? Mm-hmm. Now I've asked, but I'm letting Corey make the decision.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to get around Corey. I'm trying to say, Corey, you're in charge.
Yeah. Now there are also cases sometimes you talk to someone who might be like the head of something or pretty senior leader, and they're like, okay, next meeting I would like to talk to someone on my team who will be kind of like help me evaluate solutions. What would you do in that case?
Say that again.
So sometimes like the entry point could be like someone like head of CFO, for example, and then they'll be like, okay, next we'll have to, I can share your information with my team, and then you can talk to my team instead of kind of continue to talking to the CFO, for example.
I'm okay with that. If they're willing to, I'll talk to anybody they make introductions to. Because now they're showing me how they like to buy and how they like to purchase. Right. Yeah. Just because I'm talking to the CFO doesn't mean I'm going to close anything.
Right.
CFO is never going to, rarely is the CFO going to agree to close something the first time you talk about pricing with them anyway.
Yeah.
I've just got to jump, guys. I'll see you later. I got a customer call to get on. Thank you so much, guys.
Right.
I really appreciate it.
Thanks for hanging out, Corey.
Yeah, of course. See ya.
Thank you very much. Yeah. And what's one more kind of powerful discovery question you have seen or heard?
I think the other ones are around understanding the economic impact. Hey, if this is the pain you're having, how much time is that costing you? And even if we could make you more efficient, what would you do with that time? If you have a 10-hour a week problem and we're saving you 5 hours, that's great. But what are you going to do with those 5 hours? And what's the impact of you being able to do that activity with those 5 hours? Are they going to get a product out to market faster, which then affects revenue? Are they going to be able to spend less time doing data entry so they can make more cold calls? Okay, well, how many more cold calls? And what's your conversion rate of those cold calls? So how many more deals are you now getting? Because you're getting 5 hours a week, 40 hours a month, 25 hours a month, 20 hours a month. What's the economic impact of that? So digging deeper is the piece that is the next one. So.
Yeah. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Spend the time and sharing all of this. Yeah.
My pleasure. My
Yeah.
pleasure.